Here we are in Lightwave Layout. Now this is where all the action is going to happen. This is where your lighting happens, your animation, your motion, and this is where you generate your final images and animation. So the modeler portion, which you saw in the previous video, is where you build your objects. Layout is where you animate them. Now the difference between modeler and layout initially when you start up is that layout starts out in a big perspective view, just one big fat view, whereas modeler starts out in a quad view. And as you saw in modeler, you can certainly make each viewport a single view. Well, the same thing applies to layout, where you can make a quad view in here or multiple views. So if you press F3 on your keyboard, you'll jump right to a quad view. So very similar to modeler, layout can work the same way. I don't generally do this too often. I find it a little bit more confusing sometimes for animation, but I also know plenty of people, especially when doing character animation, really like to have multiple views open. If you keep pressing F3, you'll actually get some variations. So I've used views like this before, where I'll have an object loaded and then I will have different views over this way. So let's do this. If we jump to the Modeler Tools tab, now this is a little odd for some people, but you'll see how useful this is. Because Layout and Modeler are two separate programs, every once in a while you need just a generic object just to, well, show an example or create some ground plane or something. So what we can do in this Modeler Tools is create some simple geometry. So in this case, I'm just going to load up a torus. I'll just generate a torus object, and I'll click OK. So now we have an object loaded. In these viewports, I can say this is a top view, and I want this one to be maybe perhaps a wireframe. Here's a right view, and I want this to be a vertex mode, vertices, showing just the points. And maybe this is another perspective view, or perhaps even better, I'll keep that perspective and I'll make this a camera view. Because the camera view is actually what is going to render when I do my final output. So it's really important that I know what that view is. And here, just to see an overview of my scene, I can keep a perspective view. Now, if I press F3 again, I can keep those same kind of views, but reverse it. Press F3 again, press F3 again, and you can see how I'm just changing all these positions. You can also move your mouse to the middle of this. You can see it actually just changed the cursor. Click and drag, and you can actually just resize as you like. So that works really, really well for being very flexible. What I really like mostly is like a kind of a dual view like this, where I've got two options over here, and I could say be perspective here, make that shaded, and over here I'll generate any kind of orthogonal view from a front with maybe a flat shade or a textured shaded solid, things like that, and still keep this as a camera view. And I'll press F3 again. I kind of reverse it, F3 down, up, and then just a dual view like this, which I really like, and I'll use that quite often. And of course back to the normal. So you can cycle through all of those very easily. So layout can look just like modeler. Another thing is these buttons up here, just like they are in modeler, also are the same in layout. So your file, your edit, your help, your windows, such as your render globals and backdrop options, item properties, those will always live up here in the top left, no matter what tab we're working in. So that's really nice to know. Because again, modeler and layout have a ton of buttons, but it's easy to get overwhelmed. And what I want you to think about is just working through each of these step by step, one at a time. Think about the process and what you're doing. I'm going to press F4, just 4. Just press 4 on the keyboard. That'll jump me back to a perspective view. And while I mention that, 1 jumps to a front view. Now it says back view, but I'm actually looking towards the back from the front. So I'm actually looking at the front of the object. So even though this is back view, note that you're looking at the front of the object. 2 is my top view. 3 is my right view. 4 is perspective. 5 is a light view. So I actually am looking through the light right now, which is a terrific way to set it up. 6 is my camera view. And 7 is a schematic view, so you can see a hierarchy of your scene. Now again, if you go back to F3, you can put this schematic in one view and still keep your viewport this way. An option, instead of toggling through all of these, is to press the O key or the D key, either way, and the viewport layout's right there at the top, and you can see all of those different viewports. So let's say you just want a double vertical. You can choose that and maybe move this over like this, so you can work with your schematic view like this. It's an easy way, number one, to select things, but also to organize your scene. And I know most people kind of forget about this. They don't even know it's there, but We'll say here's our camera view, and this is actually what my camera sees, and I can rotate around, and I'll show you how to do all this and get used to the tools and get easy navigation control. But I can just work that way and just have a little schematic over here. Very easy. Press the D key again, and the viewport layout will go back to a single. And I can press 4 on my keypad to see my view. And because the camera is selected, it looks highlighted like that. So I'll just click on the torus just to select that. Okay, but those are just some of the viewport options, and all of those will always live right here. One of the things you're going to see is Virtual Studio. And what's really cool about this Virtual Studio, depending on the video card you have in, and I'll give you some specs on that, or if you have something like a 3D connection mouse, you can plug those in here and use those to control your scene. I do have one. I'll try and plug it in at some point and show you how that works. It's a little hard to show you on a training video because I need to actually show you the physical object. But if you look up 3D connection, there's 3D mouse you can get, and the way it works is that you would have this 3D mouse almost like a joystick that you can actually control your scene and control your camera. So it adds in conjunction with your normal mouse and doesn't replace it, and it's a great way to control your objects. Using it in Modeler, you can actually almost, it's like with your left hand, if you're right-handed like me, hold your object with the 3D connection mouse, and with the right mouse you can actually then adjust and tweak it. It's a very cool way to work. So let's work down these tabs. So first we have items, and again remember all of these tools up here, all these buttons, the scene editor, the virtual editor, the graph editor, image editor, as we use those throughout our course, these will remain in the same place no matter what tab we are in. So that helps you break down a lot of these tools right away. From here, you've got your load, scene, or objects. You can add things to the scene, and we'll of course be using that, adding null objects for just control and parenting and placement. You can add your lights, add cameras, and so on. You can replace objects and, of course, select and delete. Once an object is loaded, you're going to modify it. The same way you create an object in Modeler, you modify it. You load an object in Layout, and then you'd modify it, such as move the pivot, rotate or rotate a pivot, transform like size and stretch, move a path, arrange it, and so on. So very, very simple layout once you start thinking about what you want to do. When you go to the setup, just like it is in Modeler where you're creating skeletons, here you're creating bones, or you're converting the skeletons that you created in Modeler, which will help you deform an object. So that's all of those controls right there. Effects tools I mentioned briefly in the first video, which we're going to use to create some terrific dynamics using the bullet engine, which is really, really nice. Under utilities, not something you're getting into often, but you can add or load plugins, and sometimes there's additional plugins, maybe third-party ones, or if you're into programming using the relativity plugins, you can use those and get into some scripting. And there's a few others down here that you might feel might be needed, but that actually gets a little more intense, and ones we're not going to use in this course. But we might jump into the effects linker. Those are right here. When we get into flocking, I'll show you some of those. And we get to render. Well, this is really important, of course. We've got our network render. We've got our Viper. We've also got a print camera in Lightwave 11, which is really, really nice because I can't tell you the amount of times we've generated 3D for clients, and they come back and go, it's not 300 dpi, and it's 4,000 pixels, and they say it's not the right size, which the whole DPI, PPI thing becomes kind of an issue when you're working with graphic designers who are not used to 3D and not used to pixels. And this little guy right here is going to be a lifesaver to you because you can literally generate the size you need, and perhaps you want to go with centimeters instead, or PostScript and decimal inches, and you can punch in 8.5 by 11 at 300 DPI. You want a portrait, press render, it does the equivalent pixels. Press OK, and it'll render it out the right size for you. And you just save it. It'll work out great. And of course, you can render in here, motion blur preview, select various objects. And the biggest thing is this render globals. Okay, and we're going to spend a lot of time in here. Now, I have to point this out. This is one of my favorite things in Lightwave 11. For years, there was a render panel and there was a camera panel. So, for instance, when I would hit the camera and hit P to create the properties, open up the properties panel, I'd have a properties panel for the camera. Then when it came time to render, I open up the render panel. And it was two different things. In Lightwave 10, there was a little checkbox that says Use Globals. Well, that was okay, but again, it was still two panels. Lightwave 11 has finally fixed that. So thank you, programmers. We have one panel for cameras, and there it is. Whether you hit Render Globals or the properties, it will go to the same place. Here you go to Lights. Again, it's in the Render Globals. So watch. If I turn off Render Globals, and I choose Lights at the bottom, and I hit P for Properties, it goes to that Render Global. So everything's in the same place. And finally is your output, and that's where we're going to save everything. So this Render Globals is quite important. We're going to work our way through these tabs once we're ready to render. Your View tab, you can zoom, view modes, previous layout, next layout, very much like what I just showed you, F3, F4, and you can see the equivalent right there. And you can save a layout if you convert one, or set it up a certain way and move the panels around. Hardware shading, these are really nice that they're here because often these were buried inside the options. If you press O on your keyboard, you can get to all of these different options, getting into OpenGL settings and some of the hardware shading depending on the video card you have. Well, now you can just click some of these down here, and when we get to more of the texturing and shading, I'll show you those. The increase and decrease grid as well as the grid size are also important, and those are right there. Typically I tend to go into the panels, into the options or the display, and I change things, or I can use a keyboard equivalent like the left bracket or the right bracket to change that grid. You can see the keyboard equivalent right there, just ghosted on the right side. And modeler tools I had just shown you just create some instant simple geometry just to create something we can look at, and also we're going to use this for some of our dynamic lessons as well. Finally, input output. This is where we can import and export different type of objects, especially the new Go Z if you're going into ZBrush. Okay. As we get more into animation and setting things up, I'll talk about the tools down here in the timeline. You can click on the timeline, open that up, and have a little more control over those keyframes. Lastly, in the top right, just like in Modeler, you can click and hold and move that view around. Click and hold on the rotate and so on. You don't have to click and then click in here and move it. It doesn't work that way. Remember, you click and hold. It's not really a button. It's more of a control. Okay. And then this little guy right here is for your VPR, your Virtual Preview Render, or Viewport Preview Render. I like to say virtual, but it's viewport. And to get there, you go VPR. So when you select this, you actually get a real-time render in your view. And with this guy right here, I can change some of the options and actually save that view, even look at it at half resolution. We're going to use VPR quite a bit. This is a very strong feature of Lightwave. Came out in version 10. It's even better in version 11. And we are actually looking at a real-time render. So just to give you an idea, if I jump over to the surface editor and I open this up, and I'll take a look at the default surface here, I'll put smoothing on. I can actually put some specularity on, a little glossiness. I can put a little bit of reflection on, and you can see it already just starting to reflect the environment around it, okay, which is of course the rest of itself. But just like that, it's actually showing me my render and exactly what this would look like. And not to get too far ahead of ourselves, if I go in and I put some procedural textures on, and then let's just size these down, you can see that in real time I'm actually seeing these textures on here. So this viewport preview render works really, really well. And just so you know, I'm on a laptop. We have our big Mac Pro system, but I've actually chosen to do most of this course on the laptop just because of screen resolution. Our laptop is a 1440 resolution, so when it comes down to the 1280, I'm actually able to show you guys the full screen really well. Our big machine at the studio has a 27-inch monitor and a 2500 resolution, and if I recorded that whole screen, number one, the files become too big, and number two, when I scale it down to a 720p, the buttons are too small for you to see. So this way, I'm able to work in a full screen and really maximize the view, but you can still see it. And even with that, even working on a laptop, you can see that this real-time render is working pretty well. Of course, all I have here is a little torus, and if we have something more complex, it'll get a little bit more intense, but it works really, really well. So we're going to use VPR quite a bit. All right, so just a quick overview of layout. Let's move on to the next video. Just a few more things about selection, deselection, and modeler, and then we'll move from there into creating our first object.